A tense hush falls over the courtroom as Officer Daniels slams his patrol cap onto the witness stand, his fingers trembling with suppressed fury. He levels a steely glare at Samantha Reed, a sharply dressed black woman standing alone in the center of the room. Resisting arrest and assault, he declares, his voice echoing off the marble walls. Samantha's eyes never waver as she straightens her shoulders, the courtroom lights glinting off her braided hair. A bead of sweat traces down her temple, not from fear, but from righteous indignation. In that moment, every juror, reporter, and spectator feels the weight of history press down a black woman daring to stand her ground against an arrogant white officer. The air crackles with unspoken questions about power prejudice and who will emerge victorious. If you've ever felt the sting of unfair treatment, drop your experience in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you won't miss the next gripping chapter of Samantha's fight for justice. Samantha Reed stepped into the courtroom with all the poise of a seasoned lawyer, though today she stood as the defendant. At 7:45 a.m. sharp, the sun had just broken over the city skyline, flooding the grand hall with pale gold light that danced upon the polished wood and wrought iron fixtures. Each footstep echoed like a drumbeat as she walked toward her defense table. Seated beside her was Marcus Lee, her energetic young attorney, whose hands never ceased shuffling through legal briefs. He glanced toward her, seeking reassurance. Samantha offered a small nod, her own quiet affirmation that they would withstand whatever storm was coming. Moments later, Judge Harrison entered. His robes billowed behind him and his silver hair caught the light as he took his seat. His deep-set eyes swept across the room with practiced impartiality, yet Samantha noticed a flicker of curiosity when his gaze landed on her. At the plaintiff's table, Officer Bradley Daniels sat poised, adjusting the cuffs of his uniform jacket. His jaw was set, his shoulders squared. From the moment he'd arrived, his air of unassailable authority had filled the room like an invisible barrier. The prosecution rose first. District Attorney Lisa Nguyen, in her tailored gray suit, strode forward and began reciting the charges. Yet it was Daniels's testimony that would ignite the courtroom. He approached the witness stand with deliberate steps, every click of his polished boots announcing his confidence. From the outset, his narrative was immaculate. Samantha Reed had loitered outside a closed cafe, become belligerent when questioned, struck him in the chest, and attempted to seize his sidearm. As Daniels spoke, Samantha absorbed every nuance of his performance. His voice was steady, his posture commanding, but Samantha, trained for split-second decisions in hostile territories, noticed the micro-expressions that betrayed him, a twitch of his left eye, when he lied about her, turning away a restless tapping of his right foot as he exaggerated her aggression. To the casual observer, though, it was a seamless tale of victim and aggressor. Marcus Lee stood to object, eyes bright with determination, but found his voice stifled by Judge Harrison's firm admonition. "Counselor, save your questions for the cross-examination." Marcus sank back into his chair, jaw clenched, while Samantha allowed herself a quiet, measured exhale. In that instant of silence, the audience felt the hush deepen, as though the very walls were leaning in to hear what would come next. Then it was Samantha's turn. She rose and smoothed the front of her crisp white blouse, every movement deliberate. Her dark eyes shone with an inner calm that contrasted sharply with Daniel's brash confidence. As she approached the stand, she locked her gaze on Judge Harrison and spoke her oath without hesitation. The gallery watched transfixed as she took her seat, her posture erect and unwavering. DA Nguyen began her direct examination. "Ms. Reed, can you tell this court what occurred that evening?" The question was polite but loaded. Samantha leaned forward, her voice soft yet penetrating. "I was walking home after visiting a friend when I paused at the corner of Elm and Fifth to check directions." She described how Officer Daniels had approached her flashlight beam, cutting across her face, demanding her identification in a tone that felt more accusatory than procedural. I asked why Samantha continued, and he responded by grabbing my arm so forcefully that I nearly lost my balance. Journalists scribbled furiously. Jurors exchanged glances. Even Judge Harrison's eyebrows arched in mild surprise. The casual observer might have expected Samantha to break under crossfire, though her composed delivery only deepened the courtroom's focus on her words. Marcus braced himself for Nguyen's next question, but the DA paused, unprepared for this version of events. Officer Daniels' body camera was rolling throughout the encounter. Nguyen prodded, attempting to regain control. Samantha's lips curved in a subtle but knowing smile. "Accept your honor," she replied. The footage conveniently malfunctioned the moment he asserted, "I became violent." A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. Samantha's admission did not convey arrogance, but a quiet, steely resolve. By mid-morning, the tension had escalated to a palpable buzz. Reporters whispered into their phones. Spectators leaned forward as though drawn by Samantha's unspoken promise that the truth was yet to be fully revealed. And at that moment, every participant in the trial sensed they were witnessing not merely a legal battle, but a reckoning about power, race, and accountability. Samantha's testimony concluded with a pointed refusal to be cowed. "I did not resist," she stated firmly, "nor did I lay a hand on Officer Daniels. My only defense was to ask why an innocent woman's identity was deemed suspicious." With that, she stepped down from the stand. Although her voice was calm, the courtroom felt as though it had collectively held its breath and now exhaled. As the noon recess approached, Marcus and Samantha exchanged a brief conspiratorial glance. They both understood that part one of their strategy had succeeded, planting doubt about Daniels's credibility, demonstrating Samantha's composed authority, and priming the jury for the revelations still to come. Beyond the oak doors and gleaming marble floors, the city buzzed with anticipation, primed for the next act in a drama that would challenge its deepest assumptions about justice and prejudice. Tomorrow, when court reconvenes, Samantha Reed will be ready with evidence, with her story, and with an unwavering determination to turn the tide. And for those watching at home, the fight for truth is only beginning. The courtroom reconvened after a brisk lunch recess, and sunlight now streamed through the tall arched windows, casting broad swaths of light across the rows of polished benches. A low murmur rippled through the spectators as Judge Harrison took his seat again, his gray robes falling in measured folds around him. He cleared his throat, adjusting the stacks of files before him. On the surface, his expression was impassive, yet behind his tired eyes one could sense a judge who had seen too many battles fought under his gavel, too many lives altered by its strike. Today, however, something in Samantha Reed's quiet resolve had rekindled a spark of curiosity in him, a sense that this trial might force the system to reckon with hidden injustices. Officer Bradley Daniels sat at the plaintiff's table like a statue carved from arrogance. His uniform was impeccable, each crease sharp, each silver badge polished to a mirror gleam. He tapped a pen against his legal pad, the rhythmic click-click echoing off the courtroom walls. With every tap, his confidence seemed to swell, as though he could by sheer force of will command the very outcome of this trial. Yet Samantha, watching him from her seat, detected the tremor in his knuckles, the brief flicker of doubt in his eyes whenever his gaze drifted toward the jury. Across the aisle, Marcus Lee fidgeted with his fountain pen. Fresh out of law school, Marcus had built his reputation on agile legal reasoning, but nothing in his academic career had prepared him for the gravity of defending a black woman up against a police officer's testimony. He forced himself to straighten his back and recenter his thoughts. He glanced at Samantha and recalled her whispered instruction before lunch. "Stay calm. Let the facts breathe." He drew in a steadying breath. The next phase of their strategy would demand every ounce of composure he could muster. Samantha sat between them, an island of composed strength. Her braided hair was neatly coiled at the nape of her neck, and her navy blazer tailored to accentuate her posture bore no creases. To the casual observer, she might have looked like any poised businesswoman waiting for her turn to speak. But those who paid close attention saw something more, a pair of eyes that scanned the courtroom with the precision of a trained observer, cataloging every detail, each jury member's expression, each whisper among the spectators, even the slight tightening of Officer Daniels's jaw when the light caught his badge, just so. In each breath she took, there lay an almost imperceptible steeliness, the hallmark of someone forged in far more perilous arenas than this oak-paneled room. Judge Harrison tapped his gavel once, crisp as a rifle shot. The chatter died instantly. "We will resume with the defense's cross-examination of Officer Daniels," he announced, voice measured but carrying an undercurrent of expectation. Marcus rose, squared his shoulders, and approached the witness stand. Every eye in the courtroom now held its breath. The tide was shifting, and all parties sensed that Marcus's next words would decide whether Daniels's facade would shatter. "Officer Daniels." Marcus began, voice low but clear. You testified this morning that Ms. Reed became hostile the moment you approached her. Daniel's chest puffed up. Yes, he replied, chin jutting. She refused to identify herself and struck me in the chest. There it was, the same rehearsed line Samantha had already dismantled in her direct testimony. Marcus paused, letting the courtroom's hush drape over him like velvet. He fixed his gaze on the officer. You also claimed your body-worn camera malfunctioned at precisely that moment. How many times in your career has your camera failed to record critical evidence? Daniel's confident facade flickered. He shifted in the stand as though trying to regain his composure. That's rare, he stammered, fingers tightening on the edge of the stand. Equipment malfunctions happen. The word rare hung in the air, and jurors exchanged curious glances. Samantha's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. It was the smallest victory, a single crack in Daniel's polished narrative. As Marcus pressed on, delving into the officer's service record, a line of tension formed between the tables. Marcus had requested and the court had granted access to Daniel's internal affairs file, revealing a history of complaints for excessive force and racial bias, all quietly dismissed by his department. The prosecutor, D.A. Nguyen, rose to object, her practiced poise momentarily slipping. Judge Harrison barked, overruled, and the file was admitted. A collective gasp rippled through the room. For the first time, the courtroom seemed genuinely unsettled by the specter of institutional cover-up. Daniels slumped slightly in his seat when Marcus presented the documents to the jury. Each copy was scrutinized by jurors who squinted to read the fine print, uninvestigated complaints, buried reports, evidence that this was not an isolated incident, but a pattern. The legacy of Daniel's unchecked privilege lay exposed on crisp white paper. And Samantha, watching from the defense table, allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph before refocusing on the matter at hand. Late afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting elongated shadows across the floor. Samantha rose to her feet once more, stepping toward the stand. Her heels clicked with deliberate authority. She lifted her chin. Officer Daniels portrayed me as a loiterer, a threat, and a liar. She began, voice steady. But he did not capture the truth of that night. He did not record my words when I asked why I was being stopped. He did not record his own words when he called me a threat to his authority. Her gaze swept over the jury, each juror meeting her eyes as though summoned by her conviction. What he failed to record was a man who feared a black woman who simply asked a question. If asking why is a crime, then so be it, but asking for respect is not. Silence fell again, thicker this time, as though the courtroom itself had drawn in a breath. Samantha's voice carried a lyrical cadence imbued with hurt and righteous dignity. Journalists scribbled feverishly. Spectators leaned forward as though straining to hear each syllable, and even Judge Harrison's jaw clenched as he absorbed her words. Marcus stood at her side, fists lightly clenched, eyes bright with vindication. The proceedings stretched into early evening. When the gavel finally signaled recess, reporters darted forward, clamoring for sound bites. Samantha paused at the bench where jurors filed out, offering a soft nod to each one. Her calm firmness seemed to leave an indelible impression. Outside the courtroom door, Marcus flanked her as they stepped into the corridor. The hallway lights glowed warmly against the cool marble, and Samantha took a slow breath, turning to Marcus. Tomorrow, we'll drop the video evidence, she said quietly, and I'll tell them who I really am. Marcus swallowed. Lieutenant Commander Reed, he whispered, echoing the private revelation from her home. Samantha's lips curved into a small, resolute smile. Yes, it's time the truth broke free. As they walked away, the echoes of their footsteps hinted at the rising storm yet to come. The stage was set, the key players fully in view, and every heartbeat in that grand building felt the pull of an unfolding drama, one that would challenge not just one officer's credibility, but the very foundation of power and prejudice in the halls of justice. Tomorrow, under brighter lights and prying eyes, Samantha Reed would step into her full story, and the world would watch. The courtroom fell into a heavy hush as Officer Bradley Daniels made his way back to the witness stand. Morning light streamed through the arched windows, slicing across the polished oak floor like a spotlight on a stage. He climbed the steps with deliberate precision, every inch of his uniform immaculate, every badge and stripe gleaming as though polished just seconds earlier. His jaw was set, his gaze unwavering, as though he stood on familiar ground, an arena where his word carried the weight of unquestioned authority. He leaned forward, placed both hands firmly on the rail, and positioned himself in the center of the room, ready to unleash his version of events. Daniels cleared his throat and began voice booming to fill every corner of the hall. On the evening of June 12th, he announced I was on routine patrol near the 500 block of Elm Street when I observed Ms. Reed loitering outside a closed cafe. I approached her to determine her purpose. She immediately became hostile. His eyes snapped to Samantha, who sat perfectly still, braids tucked neatly behind her shoulders, eyes level with his as though daring him to lie. Reporters leaned forward, phones poised to capture every word. Jurors shifted in their seats, bracing themselves for the drama they'd come to witness. Daniels continued his tone rich with theatrical flourish. She refused to identify herself, raised her voice, and when I attempted to de-escalate, she struck me in the chest with an open hand. A collective intake of breath rippled through the audience. He paused, letting the gas build, then subsided. Then, in a blatant attempt to seize my service weapon, she reached for my holster. At that moment, I was left with no choice but to restrain her. He leaned in, voice dropping to a menacing growl. If not for my training and quick reaction, she could have disarmed me and endangered everyone around. As Daniels recited his carefully rehearsed narrative, Samantha Reed watched with a calm intensity that contrasted sharply with the officer's dramatics. Salvo after salvo of accusation rolled off his tongue, each meant to cement his image as the wronged lawman, protecting himself and the public. Yet Samantha, her muscles still imbued with the discipline of countless SEAL operations, cataloged every detail. He offered the slight tremor in his right hand when he spoke of her alleged blow, the momentary hitch in his voice as he described her hostile demeanor, the subtle shifting of his weight when he claimed his holster was nearly seized. Most of the courtroom likely missed these nuances, but Samantha knew that beneath each feint lay the seeds of doubt. The prosecutor district attorney Lisa Nguyen watched from her table, arms folded and lips pursed in satisfaction. Nguyen's strategy was clear: give Daniels the stage, allow him to establish a compelling narrative, and then let Samantha dismantle it piece by piece. Daniels' performance was the foundation, and if it cracked, everything that followed would follow suit. Daniels narrated the opening move of their fateful encounter as though describing a scripted scene in an action film. He pictured himself flicking on his flashlight to cut through the twilight, the beam landing squarely on Samantha's face. She glared back at me, he intoned with a defiance I'd not seen before. Her posture was aggressive. She made no attempt to comply. Samantha felt her muscles relax as he painted his version of events. She knew the real story would soon expose his exaggerations. Photographers' shutters clicked in sync with Daniels' every inflection. The jury leaned forward, but Samantha's presence was magnetic. She radiated a composed strength that made the stark white of her blouse seem almost radiant. Every time Daniels glanced at her, she held his eye with unflinching steadiness, an invisible challenge that demanded honesty. After she struck me, Daniels went on, voice rising. I warned her to step back. Instead, she lunged. He threw his arms wide, reenacting the supposed reach for his weapon. Her fingers grazed the grip of my service pistol. Then came the coup de grace. That's when I realized this was no ordinary suspect. This was someone who intended to overpower me. Samantha's mind raced. If his story held any truth, there should be physical evidence marks on his uniform, bruises, disturbed holsters. Yet the officer's immaculate attire belied every claim he made. Earlier, Samantha had noted that Daniels' chest bore no sign of impact, no scuff on his shirt where a powerful blow would have landed. His holster strap, she'd observed, hung perfectly taut. The courtroom lights revealed no bulge out of place. His words were sound and fury, but his uniform whispered of rehearsed falsehood. Daniels lingered in the moment. He imagined himself the stoic hero. I called for backup, he declared, and placed her under arrest to ensure the safety of bystanders. He straightened in the witness box, once again the confident officer who believed no one could challenge his version of the truth. It was then that Samantha's lawyer, Marcus Lee, rose for his cross-examination. The judge's gavel rapped once, sharp and insistent. Mr. Lee, Judge Harrison instructed, you may proceed. Marcus advanced toward the stand with deliberate calm, each step echoing in the tense silence. He reached the rail and squared his shoulders to match Daniels's posture. "Officer Daniels," he began, voice low but firm, "you testified that Ms. Reed struck you in the chest. Is that correct?" Daniels' answer was immediate. "Yes, sir." He met Marcus's gaze with unwavering certainty. Marcus paused, letting the courtroom absorb the simplicity of his question, and yet he continued. "Your uniform shows no sign of impact. There is no tear, no bloodstain, no defensive injury. How do you explain that discrepancy?" A flicker of visible strain crossed Daniels' features, a micro-expression so quick that only someone experienced in reading body language like Samantha could catch it. His breath hitched. I was wearing body armor," he stammered. Marcus nodded, unyielding. Body armor that would register a significant blow, yet still show no disturbance if someone struck you hard enough to nearly seize your weapon. Daniels shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking momentarily toward the jury. He swallowed. "It was a glancing blow," he muttered, voice halting. Marcus nodded again, turning slowly to address the jury, directly voice carrying the weight of revelation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "a glancing blow hard enough to reach his sidearm would still leave a mark on his uniform or his vest. But we have none. Not one rip, not one bruise." His words settled over the courtroom like a cold wind. That alone cast doubt on the officer's entire account. The spectators stirred, their chatter rising in a low hum. Journalists exchanged excited looks. Even the judge's eyes narrowed, the first sign of real skepticism gleaming in his gaze. He tapped the gavel, but its echo sounded more like a question than a command. Who here could trust a man whose truth fell apart at the seams? Daniels' confident facade cracked. His tap-tap on the stand's edge became a nervous tremor. His silver badge, once a shining emblem of his pride, now reflected the judge's stern appraisal like a mirror of doubt. Marcus pressed on, pulling papers from his folder records of Daniels's past use-of-force complaints, all quietly dismissed by Internal Affairs. "Officer Daniels," Marcus said quietly, "how many times have complaints been filed against you for excessive force or bias?" Daniels faltered. "None," he replied, but his voice lacked conviction. The jury's collective brow furrowed. Marcus laid out the documents one by one, letting each page drop onto the stand like a verdict upon a lie. Throughout the exchange, Samantha sat impassive, her breathing, even demeanor unshakable. Observers felt the tension tighten its grip on the room. The officer's narrative, once a towering edifice of authority, trembled as each foundational plank came loose. Samantha's seal-honed instincts told her the final blow would come when she took the stand again, and the courtroom sensed it too. The moment of true reckoning hovered just beyond the horizon. As Marcus concluded his cross-examination, the gallery held its collective breath. Officer Daniels slumped in the witness chair, defeated by discrepancies he could no longer explain away. His voice, once a resonant roar, now sounded tentative. The judge rapped his gavel, soft but resonant, signaling the end of his testimony. The audience exhaled a sound like the release of trapped air after a long dive. In the hush that followed, Samantha's eyes met Marcus's across the space between tables. No words were needed. The unspoken promise of her upcoming testimony shimmered in that glance. The next chapter of this tense drama would belong to Samantha Reed, and the courtroom, caught in the soft glow of afternoon light, waited with bated breath for the truth to emerge. The courtroom's air felt thick, as though every breath weighed a pound, when Marcus Lee rose to continue his cross-examination of Officer Daniels. The late afternoon sun had dipped low enough to send long golden rays skimming across the vaulted ceiling, illuminating the fine dust motes hanging suspended in silence. Marcus's heart pounded like a war drum in his chest. His polished black shoes seemed to stick to the oak floor as he walked toward the witness stand. Each tap of his heel echoed off the walls, punctuating the gravity of what he was about to do. He paused at the rail, cleared his throat, and glanced back at Samantha Reed. Her posture remained impeccable, her gaze steady and supportive. In that moment, Marcus felt the weight of her confidence anchoring him despite the tremor still rattling his voice. If not for Samantha's whispered counsel, "Stay calm, let the facts breathe," he might have lunged at Daniels with every aggressive instinct he'd ever honed in moot court competitions. Instead, he drew in a deep, measured breath and began. "Officer Daniels," he said, keeping his voice low but firm, You testified that Ms. Reed grabbed at your holster. You claimed you feared for your life that night. Is that correct? Daniels straightened, placing both hands on the rail. His face was a mask of unshakable certainty. Yes, Mr. Lee. I believed she intended to disarm me. Marcus nodded once, then turned slightly to address the jury, allowing his voice to carry into every ear. Yet you admit that there were no bystanders who saw her reach for your weapon. No security footage, no civilian testimony, just your word. How do we reconcile that? A low murmur flitted through the spectators. Cameras clicked. The jurors exchanged glances, some furrowed in interest, others betraying surprise. Marcus sensed the moment had arrived to press Daniels onto shaky ground. He pivoted back to the officer. And you also indicated that your flashlight beam was aimed at Ms. Reed's face. Wouldn't that have illuminated any attempt she made to grab at your holster? Any sudden movement, Marcus's question hovered like a guillotine's blade. Daniels's jaw clenched, but he answered smoothly. My flashlight was angled downward initially. I redirected it to her face only after she moved. Marcus's pulse thundered. He tightened his grip on the rail. Then before he could follow up, the sharp rap of Judge Harrison's gavel cut through the air. Mr. Lee, the judge, intoned voice crisp and unyielding. This line of questioning has grown repetitive. You may move on. The word repetitive stung like cold iron. Marcus opened his mouth to object, to argue that these inconsistencies were the very core of his defense, but the judge's stern gaze left him no choice. He swallowed his retort and sank back toward his seat, every nerve firing with frustration. Samantha, seated beside him, leaned in close and placed a reassuring hand on his arm. Stay calm, she whispered, her voice a cool breeze against the red heat of his cheeks. Let the facts breathe. Her words grounded him. He felt his tension ease as though braided leather had loosened around his chest. Samantha's quiet authority, honed through decades of military discipline, steadied him far more effectively than any courtroom maneuver. He exhaled, nodded, and watched as the judge signaled Marcus to sit. The sudden hush that enveloped the room felt pregnant with possibility. Jurors sat forward in their chairs as though drawn by an electrostatic pull toward the unfolding drama. Reporters pressed their microphones and recorders forward, capturing the charged silence. Even the spectators, many of whom had come expecting a routine trial, leaned in as though straining to glimpse what deeper story lay beneath the polished testimony of Officer Daniels. Samantha allowed her gaze to sweep across the room, cataloging every face. She saw the juror with the tired eyes, no doubt someone who had watched too many injustices piled up on court dockets. She noted the juror who tapped a pen restlessly, perhaps craving clarity amid the uncertainty. And she caught the furtive glances of bystanders whispering to each other, wondering if the grand facade of authority was cracking at the seams. From her vantage point, Samantha pieced together the subtle fracturing of Daniel's narrative, the missing evidence, the unverified assertions, the thin veneer of confidence slipping ever so slightly. The officer's suit remained immaculate, but the tremor in his voice grew more pronounced each time he repeated his claims. His silver badge reflected the afternoon light like a fallen star. Yet in that dazzling gleam lay the seeds of doubt. If witness credibility could be tarnished by a moment's hesitation, then Daniel's convictions now stood on dangerously treacherous ground. Marcus sat back, pulling his legal pad into his lap. He jotted a few notes, his hand steady once more. Samantha watched him write, feeling a surge of pride in his resilience. His legal acumen was sharp, but under her calm guidance, his tactics had become surgical, striking precisely at the heart of the prosecution's case without igniting the judge's ire further. They needed more than cross-examination to topple Daniel's testimony. They needed compelling proof, and that proof was still waiting behind closed doors, ready to be unleashed at precisely the right moment. Judge Harrison regarded the courtroom with a fatherly weariness, tapping his gavel again. We will proceed with the rest of the defense's witnesses, he announced. The clerk began calling the next name, but the momentum had shifted. Officers escorting witnesses paused at the door, adjusting their posture, as if sensing the undercurrent swirling in the hall. The prosecutor, D.A. Nguyen, rose, pages rustling in her folder. Her poised veneer, too, had lost a fraction of its smooth polish. Even she seemed wary of the court's shifting mood. Samantha leaned closer to Marcus as the next witness took the stand. "The jury is listening," she murmured, and he offered her a grateful nod. The bystander video, her service record, the hidden narrative of her true identity, all of it would come together to reveal the full textured truth. And when it did, the polished story of loitering and assault would shatter like glass underfoot. In that charged moment, every observer in the courtroom felt the electricity of impending revelation. The rows of polished benches became a theater of silent anticipation. The jurors, once passive receptors of carefully scripted testimony, now leaned in like detectives hungry for clues. The spectators, accustomed to the solemn ritual of legal proceedings, now sensed they were witnessing something far more profound, a collision between raw authority and hard-won truth with Samantha Reed at its center. As the day wore on and the defense began presenting witnesses, Samantha prepared herself for her own next turn on the stand. She reflected on her whispered advice to Marcus: let the facts breathe. In the silent spaces between questions and the pregnant pauses of judicial rebuke and the fleeting tremors of an officer's lie, there lay the opportunity to expose the deeper story. A story not only of one night on Elm Street, but of the systemic bias that allowed falsehoods to flourish under a badge. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the courtroom lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the floor, Samantha felt a quiet thrill at the thought of what was to come. The chamber around her had become a crucible, forging anticipation into resolve. The polished narrative the prosecution had built was now riddled with doubt, its foundation undermined by the jury's collective unease. Tomorrow would bring further evidence, strategic reveals, and the moment when Samantha's own voice, fortified by her seal-honed discipline, would strike the final blow. But tonight, in the stillness of that grand hall, Samantha sat alongside Marcus, their silent partnership, a promise of the justice that would soon bloom. And as they rose for the court's adjournment, the courtroom seemed to exhale. Its breath held until dawn, for the trial's rising arc was far from its climax, and the fight for truth had only just begun. The courtroom grew still as the bailiff called Samantha Reed to the stand, her name echoing softly against the tall marble walls. The late afternoon light filtered through the high windows, slanting across her figure in gilded beams, as though nature itself spotlighted her arrival. Samantha rose from her chair with a smooth grace, her navy blazer moving in a quiet wave that mirrored her composed determination. Each step toward the witness stand resonated faintly in the hush, and she paused at the rail, straightening her spine as though guided by an invisible wire. She touched the microphone with a single fingertip, testing its position before settling into a poised stance. Her braided hair framed her face, which carried neither tremor nor trace of fear. Only the quiet intensity of someone who had weathered far greater storms. The judge nodded, signaling her to take the oath, and Samantha repeated the pledge with crystal clarity. As she took her seat, the hairs on the back of several jurors' necks seemed to rise. There was something in her calm that felt both unassailable and supremely honest. District Attorney Lisa Nguyen leaned forward, folding her hands atop her stack of files. Her tone was courteous but firm as she began her direct examination. "Ms. Reed, please describe for the court what occurred on the evening of June 12th. Samantha inhaled softly, letting her eyes wander across the room, seeing reporters poised with pens, seeing jurors absorbing her every nuance, seeing Officer Daniels watching from his table with a rigid posture. She let the moment stretch, anchoring herself in the courtroom's quiet anticipation. "I had just left my friend's apartment," she began, voice low and composed, and was walking home. "Around 8:15 p.m., I stepped onto the corner of Elm and 5th to check my phone for directions." Her words were simple, almost mundane, yet each syllable carried a quiet authority. She explained how she glanced down at her screen under the dim glow of a street lamp, the world around her darkening into pockets of shadow. "That's when Officer Daniels approached me," she continued, turning slightly so that her gaze met his across the room. The officer's expression tightened. A bead of sweat glimmered at his temple. Samantha spoke of his flashlight shining into her face, its abrupt harshness cutting through the twilight. "He asked for my identification without explanation," she said, voice unwavering. "So I asked, 'May I know why?'" A murmur rippled through the spectators as Samantha delivered her next line, soft, but charged with quiet defiance. "I never resisted. I simply asked why." The courtroom seemed to exhale as though all the built-up tension released in a single breath. Cameras clicked, jurors shifted, leaning forward, as though drawn to the truth emanating from her words. Die Nguyen pressed on neutral tone laced with a challenge. And how did Officer Daniels respond when you asked for his reason? Samantha's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, an almost invisible gesture that spoke volumes. He raised his voice, she said, and accused me of being uncooperative. When I maintained my question, he grabbed my arm. Her voice did not tremble. It rang with the calm precision of someone trained to remain composed under fire. I asked him to let me go. I did not raise my voice. I did not move aggressively. I only sought to understand why I was being detained. The gallery stirred as she described his grip, how his fingers dug into her skin and yanked her toward the squad car. Samantha reminded the court that he claimed she tried to seize his weapon, but her blouse unmarred and crisp bore no sign of a struggle against the officer's holster. She allowed a beat of silence, letting the jury see that he had no plausible justification for her charging at him. As she spoke, Samantha's mind drifted momentarily to that street corner, recalling the flicker of anxiety when the beam of light first hit her eyes, and the shock that followed when the officer's hand found her arm. But rather than dwell on trauma, she framed her recollection with the clarity of documented fact. The timestamps on her phone, the absence of any disturbance call in police logs for that block. The testimony she knew Marcus Lee would present later from a neighbor who'd glanced out the window and seen her quietly checking Google Maps. Her defense attorney sat at the table, shoulders squared, eyes unwavering. Marcus had given her a quick nod before she took the stand, an unspoken assurance that he would pick up her narrative thread and weave it through the evidence yet to come. Samantha drew confidence from that solidarity. She was no longer alone in this fight. Together, they would dismantle the officer's rehearsed tale. The judge leaned forward, eyebrows slightly raised. "Ms. Reed," he said quietly, "is it your testimony that you offered full cooperation, requested only clarity, and at no point engaged in any physical aggression?" Samantha's gaze held his steady. "Yes, Your Honor. At no point did I raise a hand against Officer Daniels. I only sought accountability and explanation for why my presence was deemed suspicious." There was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The jurors' brows furrowed with fresh doubt. The spectators whispered among themselves as though they too sensed that Daniels's carefully constructed story had at last encountered an immovable object. Die Nguyen nodded appreciation for Samantha's composure glinting in her eyes. "Thank you, Ms. Reed." She sat passing the baton to Marcus Lee for the cross-examination that would probe Daniels' testimony further and pave the way for the strategic reveal waiting in the wings. Samantha rose, stepping back from the stand with the same measured grace she'd used to approach it. As she returned to her seat, her gaze lingered on Officer Daniels. He sat forward now, hands clasped tightly in front of him, eyes darting to her blouse, tracing the absence of any sign of aggression she described. He swallowed, and for the first time his confidence faltered. The day's closing light slanted through the windows, bathing Samantha in a warm glow. She settled back into her seat, her composure intact even as whispers rippled through the courtroom. The first crack in Daniels's armor had formed a fissure, widened by her calm testimony. The audience, primed for spectacle, had found themselves drawn to the quiet strength of a woman claiming her truth. As the judge prepared to adjourn, an undercurrent of anticipation pulsed through the hall. Tomorrow, new exhibits would unfold. The bystander video would play, and with it evidence that would further unravel the officer's account. And in the next phase of her testimony, Samantha would step beyond the role of just a defendant. She would reveal the strategic secret she'd long kept hidden. For now, the first strike had landed, and Samantha's steady words had shown the jury that requesting respect is no crime. As the gavel fell, the courtroom emptied in murmured reverence, leaving behind the echo of a woman's unwavering declaration, "Sometimes the most powerful weapon is simply the courage to ask why." The early evening chill still lingered in the air as Samantha Reed steered Marcus Lee down the courthouse corridor toward the parking garage. The tall glass doors clicked shut behind them, shutting out the hushed buzz of the reporters and curious onlookers gathering on the pavement. Marcus, clutching his briefcase, cast a wary glance over his shoulder as they slipped into the garage's concrete quiet. Samantha's footsteps echoed in the near-empty space as she led the way to her car parked against the far wall, its dark paint absorbing the dim fluorescent glow above. They drove in silence, the city's skyline receding behind them as dusk settled over quieter neighborhoods. Samantha navigated streets that twisted between rows of modest homes, each porch light haloing a small island of warmth. The car's interior smelled faintly of leather and jasmine. Samantha's signature scent melding oddly with the residual tension in the air. Marcus flicked on the map display, but Samantha shook her head. "You don't need directions," she said gently. "We're almost there." His curiosity finally broke through the hush. "Where are we headed?" he asked. Voice hushed, eyes fixed on her profile in the rearview mirror. "My home," she replied. Voice as calm as her courtroom testimony. "There's something I need you to see, something I should have shared earlier." Marcus nodded, uncertainty flickering in his gaze. He stole another glance at the quiet streets as they turned onto a narrow lane lined with towering oaks. Samantha parked in front of a small but sturdy bungalow, its brick facade bathed in the soft glow of a single porch lantern. No grand estate, just a simple home that spoke of privacy rather than pretense. She reached across Marcus to unlock her car door, then led him up the short walkway. The porch light illuminated her navy blazer as she paused at the threshold. "Ready?" she asked, hand hovering over the door handle. He swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." Inside the house was as Spartan as its exterior suggested. The living room was anchored by a modest sofa and a coffee table strewn with a few law books and an open laptop. Photographs lined one wall, a younger Samantha in a crisp navy uniform, flanked by crewmates waving from the deck of a ship. Another showed her mid-jump from a helicopter and camouflage rifle slung at her side. On a nearby mantelpiece sat a folded American flag in a glass case and a glass-fronted shadow box displaying an array of medals and commendations. Marcus's eyes roamed, taking in the artifacts of a life far removed from the civilian world. "This is impressive," he murmured, voice barely above a whisper. Samantha moved to a small desk against the opposite wall where a leather-bound folder lay waiting. The desk bore only a single lamp, its soft light glinting off the folder's worn edges. She sat and patted the seat beside her. "Please," she invited. Marcus sat, heart thudding. She opened the folder and slid out a stack of documents bound with a silver clip service records. Training certificates, commendation letters signed by admirals. He recognized terms like UDT-21 Special Operations and Combat Expeditionary Medal. He watched as Samantha ran a fingertip over the embossed seal on her discharge papers, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy. "I should have told you sooner," Samantha said, voice steady but low. "But I needed to be strategic. If the prosecution learned I was a Navy SEAL from the start, they'd argue I used my training to intimidate Officer Daniels. They'd paint my questions as rehearsed interrogations." Her calm eyes met his. "This trial isn't just about clearing my name. It's about dismantling a system that underestimates and criminalizes Black women. I needed you to understand exactly who you're defending." Marcus leaned forward, picking up a commendation from a commanding officer praising her leadership under fire. "You led SEAL teams in hostile territories," he said, disbelief and admiration mingling in his tone. "You navigated minefields, both literal and figurative." Samantha's lips curved in the faintest smile. "War zones have clearer rules of engagement than this city's streets," she replied. "Here, bias can hide behind a badge. I've faced enemies who fired bullets. Today I face an enemy of prejudice and power." She placed her hand over the folder. "You needed to see this so you could wield my real story at the right moment." Marcus closed the folder slowly. His mind raced, imagining how this revelation would reshape the courtroom's understanding. "Lieutenant Commander Reed," he began, voice steadying as conviction took root. "This changes everything. When we present this, the jury will see you not as a typical defendant, but as someone who sacrificed 20 years to protect this nation and who now stands before them demanding the same standards of accountability for their protector." Samantha nodded. "Exactly. It turns the lens back on Officer Daniels and the institution he represents. He claimed fear for his safety, yet he confronted a decorated SEAL without provocation. It underscores his hypocrisy." He leaned back, absorbing the weight of her words. "We'll need to frame this carefully," he mused. "First, we reinforce the flaws in his testimony, camera malfunctions, inconsistencies in his story. Then at the pivotal moment, you reveal your service record. The courtroom will never see you or him the same way again." She folded her hands in her lap, posture relaxed yet alert. "That's the plan. Timing is everything." If we reveal too early, the prosecution will spin it as a stunt. Too late, and the damage to his credibility may already be contained. We'll introduce it right after the bystander video plays the visual proof of his aggression. When the jury sees that, they'll be primed to interpret your revelation through a lens of injustice corrected. Marcus picked up a framed photo from the mantel, studying the metal ribbons. Your record shows the Bronze Star Navy Commendation and Combat Action Ribbon, he noted, astonished. You've earned every ounce of respect they deny you here. Samantha's eyes glistened with quiet pride. Those medals meant something when I earned them, when I served alongside men who accepted me as one of their own. But here the stakes are different. No medal can inoculate me from prejudice. That's why I must wield my service as evidence of unjust treatment, not as a shield of privilege. He set the photo carefully back down. I understand, he said softly. And I'm honored to be your counsel. She placed her hand on his arm. I trust you, Marcus. You've guided me through every step so far. Now you know the full story, and with it the exact caliber of the weapon we hold the truth. Outside, the street lamp flickered on, casting a halo around the bungalow's windows. Samantha stood and crossed to the front door, stopping beside Marcus. Get some rest, she said. Tomorrow will be a long day. Marcus rose as well, giving her a respectful nod. I'll be ready, he promised. Lieutenant Commander Reed. She offered him a small, genuine smile. Just Samantha in the courtroom. We'll let the evidence speak its own language. They stepped onto the porch together, the door clicking softly behind them. The night air felt alive with possibility. In the distance, a lone siren wailed, a reminder of the justice system's reach and its flaws. Samantha and Marcus shared a brief glance, an unspoken pact of partnership in the fight ahead. As they parted ways, Marcus heading home to prepare his closing arguments. Samantha returning to her quiet vigil by the mantel, their thoughts were synchronized. The next day would not simply be another hearing. It would be the moment when a retired Navy SEAL would stand before a jury and remind them that courage, discipline, and truth belong not only to those in uniform, but to every citizen who dares to demand accountability. And after tonight's revelation, the courtroom anchored by oak and marble would never ignore that fact again. The courtroom pulsed with a tense expectancy as the bailiff announced the continuation of proceedings. Morning light streamed in through the arched windows, illuminating the polished wooden benches packed with spectators. Samantha Reed sat beside Marcus Lee, her posture steady, her face calm but alert. Across the aisle, Officer Daniels rested his hands on the edge of the witness stand, every muscle taut and ready. District Attorney Nguyen watched with a tight smile, prepared to pounce, while Judge Harrison observed the theater-like anticipation in his court with narrowed eyes. Marcus rose folder in hand and approached the bench. His gait was deliberate, each step measured, mirroring the gravity of what he was about to unveil. The judge's gavel struck once, and the courtroom fell silent. Marcus paused, making eye contact with the jury. 12 individuals whose expressions ranged from curiosity to skepticism. He nodded respectfully, then addressed the judge. Your Honor, the defense would like to submit a piece of evidence, not previously available video footage recorded by a bystander at the scene of Miss Reed's arrest. He extended a USB drive toward the clerk, who accepted it and plugged it into the courtroom's media system. A hum of murmurs rippled through the gallery. Reporters leaned forward, smartphones poised. Spectators craned their necks, eager to witness the moment when the prosecution's narrative would meet unvarnished reality. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. Upload the footage. Let's proceed. His tone brooked no delay. The large screen mounted on the wall flickered to life. Grainy images filled the frame. A stationary patrol car window provided a narrow view of the sidewalk at dusk, its silver trim glinting under a street lamp. Samantha's silhouette appeared, phone in hand, shoulders squared, as she looked down at her screen. Then Officer Daniels entered the frame, flashlight beam cutting a swath of light across her face. The angle wavered, giving every pause a sense of raw authenticity. A collective breath caught in the room as observers recognized the scene. The audio crackled muted traffic sounds, distant voices. Then Daniels' voice, sharp and commanding. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. His hand shot out, gripping Samantha's arm with unmistakable force. The footage froze on the image, his knuckles whitened around the fabric of her sleeve, her fingers splayed in surprise. Gasps erupted simultaneously from jurors, spectators, even reporters. Judge Harrison's gavel slammed down its reverberation, slicing through the uproar. Order, he bellowed, his voice echoing in the lofty chamber. Yet the staccato pattern of shock and murmurs persisted, a dissonant backdrop to what was unfolding on screen. Marcus allowed the moment to stretch, letting the weight of that frozen frame sink into every mind present. Then he pressed play. The video resumed. Daniels's grip tightened as Samantha attempted to gently withdraw her arm. His tone turned low and contemptuous. Women like you need to learn how to listen. A guttural reaction surged through the courtroom. One juror's hand flew to her mouth, another blinked in disbelief. Even District Attorney Nguyen's composed facade cracked. Her eyes widened, lips parting in silent surprise. Across the aisle, Officer Daniels' smug confidence dissolved into visible panic. His face drained of color, eyes darting to the jury as though pleading for rescue. The polished uniform that once lent him an aura of unquestionable authority now looked like a costume slipping off its actor. Judge Harrison pounded his gavel again, firmer this time, as though trying to hammer the court back into order. "Settle down," he commanded, though his own voice trembled with suppressed frustration. The murmurs dwindled but left a charged silence in their wake. Marcus stepped back, letting the image of Samantha's composed stance speak volumes. The jury leaned forward, riveted as the footage continued. It showed Daniels shoving Samantha against the patrol car, her body recoiling under the impact. A bystander's gasp punctuated the audio, and then the camera wavered as though the person holding it recoiled in shock. The screen went black for a moment, then resumed to capture Daniels briskly drawing handcuffs and clicking them around Samantha's wrists. When the video ended, the courtroom remained suspended in disbelief. Judge Harrison ran a hand through his silver hair, gaze fixed on the screen even as it went dark. Finally, he addressed Officer Daniels directly. "Officer Daniels," he said, voice low but carrying an edge of impatience, "explain why your testimony differs so drastically from this footage." Daniels rose unsteadily, jaw clenched as though bracing himself against a gale. He swallowed hard, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, that video, it doesn't capture what led up to the incident. Miss Reed was hostile. She refused my lawful orders." His voice quavered on the last word, revealing cracks in his conviction. Marcus seized the opening. "Hostile?" he asked, stepping forward. "So you decided to use physical force before any disorderly conduct occurred. You witnessed no erratic behavior, just a woman checking her phone. And when she asked why you demanded ID, you called her resistant. Then you justified your assault with a fabrication. That is not hostile, that is abuse." The judge's lips pressed into a thin line as he regarded Marcus. The gallery leaned in the tension now palpable enough to taste. Journalists scribbled furious notes. Jurors shifted in their seats, exchanging glances of dawning comprehension. The scales had tipped. Daniel's credibility lay in tatters. Daniel sagged, mouth parting as though to reply, but his words faltered on his lips. His confident smirk from earlier had vanished, replaced by a pallid mask of regret and panic. His uniform, once a symbol of his unassailable power, now seemed ill-fitting, like an actor caught in a role he could no longer perform. Samantha sat motionless, eyes unwavering, as though she had always known this moment would come. The tension that had knotted her muscles moments before dissipated in a wave of resolute calm. She glanced at Marcus, who offered a small, encouraging nod. Between them, an unspoken acknowledgement past the trial had reached its turning point. Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair, fingertips pressed together. "We will take a brief recess to allow the court to review this evidence and consider its implications," he announced, voice measured. "Court is adjourned for 15 minutes. As the gavel fell, spectators erupted into whispered conversations that cascaded through the benches like a ripple across a pond. Some heads turned to Daniels, now slumped in his witness chair. Others watched Samantha, whose composed silhouette bore the dignity of someone vindicated. The jurors filed out slowly, eyes lingering on the scene of the video replay, effortlessly emblazoned in their minds. In the hallway, reporters scrambled to capture reactions. One bystander juror, shaking her head, muttered, "I never expected to see that." Another whispered, "He looked so sure." Until that video. Back in the courtroom, Marcus approached Samantha as the gallery emptied. "We did it," he said, voice low but triumphant. She offered a quiet smile. Not yet, she replied. But we're close. Now they see the truth, not the fiction. Outside, the warm afternoon sun bathed the courthouse facade, a stark contrast to the storm that had just shaken its halls. Spectators spilled onto the steps, their conversations alive with the video's revelation. Camera crews jockeyed for position to catch Samantha's exit, but she and Marcus slipped through a side door heading back into the quieter corridors. Each step echoed with the certainty that the trial's momentum had irrevocably shifted in their favor. The first blow had been struck, and it had landed true. Daniel's polished narrative lay shattered, and the jury, once neutral observers, now carried in their minds the vivid, unedited truth of a bystander's lens. Tomorrow, new challenges would arise, the service record reveal closing arguments, and the final deliberation. But this day belonged to the power of undeniable evidence, and to Samantha Reed, whose unwavering calm had guided the courtroom to its moment of reckoning. When the court reconvened after the brief recess, the tension in the air felt almost electric. The afternoon sun had dipped lower, sending warm rays through the high windows and casting long shadows across the polished floor. Officer Daniels sat at the witness stand, his uniform still immaculate, but his shoulders slumped as though the weight of the bystander footage had pressed him into defeat. Samantha Reed remained poised at the defense table, her navy blazer catching the light, a beacon of quiet resolve amid the courtroom's hushed murmurs. Judge Harrison rapped his gavel. "Ms. Reed, the court will hear your testimony." Samantha rose, smoothing the front of her crisp white blouse. Every movement was measured, a testament to a discipline forged far from these oak-paneled walls. She walked to the stand with the assurance of a soldier stepping into battle, though her weapon today was the unvarnished truth. She touched the rail, leaned forward slightly, and looked directly at the jury. Their faces were intent, some still nursing the shock of the video, others pressing their chins into their hands, trying to reconcile the evidence before them. Samantha cleared her throat, but her voice emerged soft and steady, imbued with an inner steeliness that resonated through the silent chamber. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "you have seen the video evidence of what I experienced that night, an unprovoked, grab a demeaning slur, physical force used without cause. But there's more you need to understand about me and about how authority can be both a shield and a weapon." A murmur rippled through the gallery as she spoke, but Judge Harrison silenced it with a raised hand. Samantha continued without hesitation. "I served my country under fire. As Lieutenant Commander Reed, I led SEAL teams into hostile territory. I learned to de-escalate tense situations before drawing a weapon. When lives were at stake, I protected my team by using patient strategy and respect for the rules of engagement. Every mission required discipline, not just physical strength." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Photographer shutters clicked softly, echoing like distant thunder. Samantha's gaze swept over the jurors again, landing on the foreperson whose eyes reflected a dawning respect. But Samantha said, voice rising with quiet intensity in that moment under the street lamp, "Officer Daniels chose aggression over dialogue, force over understanding. He treated me not as a fellow citizen deserving of explanation, but as someone whose voice didn't matter. He weaponized his authority." She tilted her head as though replaying the memory. "He told me, women like you need to learn how to listen." The gallery gasped. Overhead lights glinted off Daniel's badge, now transformed from a symbol of protection to a symbol of unchecked power. Samantha's words landed like precise strikes, each one exposing the fracture in his testimony and the deeper bias at play. "When I asked why he demanded my ID," she went on, "I was not hostile. I was not obstructive. I was only asking what any of us would ask, why am I being stopped?" That simple question threatened him because it held him accountable. It disrupted the automatic assumption that his authority was beyond question. She leaned forward, voice firmer. Authority must be accountable or it becomes tyranny. "In my 20 years of service, I stood for accountability. I stood for protecting the innocent." Officer Daniels, by contrast, hid behind his badge to justify violence and humiliation. A juror shifted, breaking eye contact to scribble a note. Another pressed her lips together as though steeling herself for the paradigm shift Samantha was orchestrating. The room crackled with the energy of a story recentered from the officer's monologue to a soldier's moral clarity. Samantha let her gaze drift toward Daniels. His face was pale brow, furrowed eyes avoiding hers. She spoke with empathetic firmness. I know what fear feels like. I have navigated minefields where one wrong step can cost lives. But I never once used my training to intimidate or harm the defenseless. Because strength without restraint becomes cruelty, and power untested by truth becomes corruption. She drew a steady breath, softening her tone. I'm not here to dishonor every officer who wears the uniform. Many serve with integrity. But when someone uses that uniform to cover up lies and abuse, there must be consequences. That's why I stand before you today. Her final words fell over the courtroom like a clarion call. I ask you to consider not just what you've seen, but what you believe about justice and authority. Do we allow one man's unchecked power to silence a woman's question, or do we hold him to the same standards he was sworn to uphold? Silence wrapped the room again, thick, expectant humming with the collective heartbeat of jurors and spectators. Judge Harrison leaned back, his gavel poised but untouched. Across from Samantha, Marcus Lee watched with pride, his notes forgotten beside him. The tactical reveal, the strategic framing of her service, and her moral argument had landed with undeniable impact. Officer Daniels remained seated on the stand, mouth parted, as though to speak, yet no words came. His earlier smirk was replaced by a mask of regret. His posture betrayed the realization that he could no longer command this narrative. His own testimony had unraveled, and Samantha's character-driven climax had woven a new tapestry, one where honor faced off against impunity and truth confronts authority's darkest impulses. After a breath that felt like an eternity, Judge Harrison rapped his gavel softly. Thank you, Ms. Reed. The court will now hear closing arguments. His tone was respectful, laced with the weight of the evidence that had pierced his courtroom's customary proceedings. As Samantha stepped down from the stand, her posture remained unbowed. She returned to her seat beside Marcus, eyes still lingering on the jurors whose faces mirrored the internal reckoning she had ignited. In her wake, the courtroom felt changed, as though the air itself had been purified by her declaration. Outside the oak doors, reporters hustled to update live streams. Retired Navy SEAL stuns court with moral appeal, read one headline. Strength meets subpoena, declared another. Samantha's composed silhouette became a symbol of resilience and righteous indignation, reverberating beyond the trial's marble confines. In the hallway, jurors paused to confer in hushed tones, nodding to one another. The seeds of doubt had blossomed fully. The defendant was no longer perceived as a mere suspect, but as a soldier standing for principle. The case had ascended from mere facts to a deeper examination of values, and Samantha's character-driven climax had ensured that the jury's deliberations would center on justice, not deference. As the courtroom emptied for the day, Samantha and Marcus lingered by the defense table. He offered her a quiet nod of admiration. "You were incredible," he said, voice low. She gave him a gentle smile, fatigue and relief mingling in her eyes. "We'll see if it's enough," she replied. "But I believe this jury understands what real service means." They gathered their belongings, stepping into the corridor where the late sunlight glowed warmly. Beyond the trial, a larger battle waited, a battle for accountability and respect that reached far beyond Elm Street. But in that moment, Samantha Reed had delivered her character-driven climax, and the courtroom crackled with the human cost of authority abused and the resounding power of disciplined integrity. The courtroom settled into an anticipatory hush as Judge Harrison rose and signaled for closing arguments. The late afternoon sunlight, now softened by the building's thick window panes, cast a warm glow across the polished mahogany benches. Marcus Lee stood buttoning his jacket with a deliberate calm that belied the electricity humming just beneath his composed exterior. He stepped forward, pausing for a moment in front of the jury box, where 12 citizens sat poised to render their verdict. Their faces were etched with thoughtfulness, some still haunted by the memory of the bystander video, others moved by Samantha Reed's eloquent testimony. All of them carried the weight of the evidence and the responsibility of their decision. Marcus cleared his throat softly, then began in a steady, resonant voice, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today you stand at a crossroads. On one path lies blind deference to authority, the unquestioned power of a badge that shields misconduct and shields prejudice. On the other lies justice, the principle that no one, no matter their rank, no matter their uniform, is above accountability. Your task is simple yet profound. Decide which path our community will take. He let that notion linger, scanning the jury to ensure each member felt the gravity of the choice. You have seen how Officer Daniels spun a tale of loitering hostility and a desperate reach for his weapon, all to justify unjustified force. You have watched as shaky video footage revealed the truth, a grounded, unarmed woman gently asking for her rights, met instead with a violent grab and a demeaning slur. You have heard Samantha Reed, a retired lieutenant commander in the Navy SEALs, recount her 2 decades of disciplined service under fire service defined not by aggression, but by de-escalation, by strategy, by respect for the rules of engagement. A murmur swept through the gallery as Marcus pivoted toward the jurors. A decorated SEAL was humiliated by a badge unchecked. The same badge that symbolizes protection was used to suppress a citizen's voice. Think about that. Think about the man sworn to protect and serve, whose first instinct was to dominate rather than dialogue. Do we reward such conduct by ignoring the evidence, by letting one man's word override facts captured on video? Or do we say that truth matters more than blind loyalty to a symbol? He allowed his gaze to settle on Officer Daniels, who sat beside his attorney. Shoulders, tight eyes fixed on the floor. Officer Daniels asks you to believe he feared for his safety. But if he truly feared for his safety, why did he neither draw his weapon nor issue a single precursory warning? Why did he lunge first and ask questions later? And why is his statement so riddled with inconsistencies, camera malfunctions, missing corroboration, a spotless uniform that contradicts the narrative of a violent struggle? Marcus's voice rose with measured intensity. These are not mistakes. These are calculated deceptions meant to distort reality. The jurors leaned forward, their collective weight pressing into the choice they had to make. Marcus turned his attention back to the core of his argument, the people they believed themselves to be. Our oath as citizens, yours as jurors, demands that we preserve the integrity of justice. We cannot claim that justice is blind when we see prejudice in action and refuse to act. We cannot claim that our system works when it allows such abuses to go unchecked. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a single printed page, a redacted summary of Daniels' internal affairs history. This is not an attack on law enforcement as a whole, he said, holding the page for the jury to glimpse the words excessive force and racial bias amid blank spaces. It is an attack on the dangerous few who betray the public trust. Officer Daniels accumulated multiple complaints that vanished into the department's archives. Today, you have the power to ensure those complaints did not vanish in vain. Marcus paused, allowing the jurors to reflect on the human cost of inaction. Samantha Reed is not merely a victim. She is a patriot, a veteran who risked her life to defend the freedoms we all cherish. Yet here she stands defending her own right to basic respect. She did not seek confrontation, but she refused to be silenced. And today you can ensure that her stand is not in vain. He stepped back, letting the weight of his words settle. Across the aisle, D.A. Nguyen rose to deliver her own closing argument, her posture straight, her voice polished and commanding. Members of the jury, she began, no one questions Miss Reed's service or her devotion to this country. We honor those who wear our nation's uniform. But this case is not about medals or commendations. It is about one simple question. Did Officer Daniels have a legal basis for his actions? Did Ms. Reed resist or assault him, as he claims? The evidence shows otherwise. Her tone, though professional, lacked the moral urgency that had filled Marcus's plea. Yes, the video captured his grip, and his words she conceded. But that video is incomplete. It does not show the moments before the recording began. It does not capture the calls he received, the reports of suspicious activity in that area earlier that night. It does not show you why he acted as he did. She adjusted her folder and leaned forward. Law enforcement officers make split-second decisions every day. They do so under stress with public safety on the line. Officer Daniels believed he was doing his duty. To convict him on these charges would undermine the very foundation of our justice system. It would send a message that our officers cannot act decisively when circumstances demand it. Her argument unfolded like a well-rehearsed script, but the courtroom had already absorbed the fuller narrative. Many of the jurors' faces remained impassive, though their eyes flickered with the images they had seen, images of injustice betrayed and dignity restored. The weight of the final plea hung between the two positions: deference to an officer's version versus upholding the evidence of truth. Judge Harrison rose, signaling the end of closing arguments. "Thank you, counsel. The court will now instruct the jury on the applicable law. Jury deliberations will commence shortly." He rapped his gavel, the sound decisive and solemn. As the jurors filed out to begin their deliberations, Samantha Reed and Marcus Lee exchanged a knowing glance. They had laid bare the choice facing the jury: in stark relief, uphold justice or shield misconduct. The courthouse hallways echoed with whispers, some hopeful, some anxious, all charged with the moment's significance. In the jury room, chairs scraped softly, papers rustled, and 12 individuals carried with them the weight of a community's trust. Would they choose blind deference to authority, or would they choose accountability and truth? Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps, as if the world itself awaited their verdict. And in the stillness of that moment, one thing was clear: no matter the outcome, the reverberations of this trial would extend far beyond Elm Street. It would shape how power is wielded, how questions are answered, and how justice is served for a decorated veteran, for all citizens, and for the principles that define a just society. The jury filed back into the courtroom with an air of palpable tension, the 12 faces bearing expressions that ranged from solemn to resolute. Samantha Reed sat beside Marcus Lee, palms resting lightly on the polished surface of the defense table. Across the room, Officer Daniels stiffened in his seat as the jurors took their places in the box. Judge Harrison cleared his throat and peered over the rim of his glasses. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" he asked. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with kind, steady eyes, rose and nodded. She unfolded the paper on her clipboard and began to read in a clear, steady voice that filled the chamber. "In the case of State versus Samantha Reed, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty on all charges." Her words seemed to hang for a moment, suspended in the hush that enveloped the courtroom. Then, as though a dam had burst, a ripple of emotion swept through the spectators. Gasps, quiet tears, a few restrained claps. Samantha's chest rose and fell in a deep breath as relief and vindication flowed through her. Marcus exhaled as though a weight had lifted from his shoulders. His shoulders relaxed and his eyes shone with pride. Officer Daniels' face drained of color. His posture slumped and he lowered his gaze, not just defeated but unmasked. The uniform that had once symbolized unassailable authority now looked like a costume discarded after a scene gone awry. Around him, his fellow officers sat in stunned silence, their earlier solidarity fractured by the unmistakable truth. Judge Harrison rapped his gavel gently, calling the court to order. "The jury has spoken. This court accepts the verdict of not guilty." He paused, surveying the courtroom's shifting energy. "This case is adjourned." As the gavel fell, Samantha stood. Her movement was graceful yet unyielding, an embodiment of the resilience she had displayed throughout the trial. She walked past Officer Daniels, meeting his eyes for a brief moment. There was no triumph in her look, only a quiet assertion the truth had prevailed. Out on the courthouse steps, reporters and cameras clustered like bees around a honeycomb. Flashbulbs popped, capturing the moment for everyone who would witness it later on screens and headlines. Nathaniel Cruz, a televised news anchor, leaned in with microphone poised, his lens pointed toward Samantha's composed silhouette. She stepped forward, her navy blazer still immaculate and framed by the grand stone columns that rose behind her like silent sentinels. Today she began, voice clear over the roar of the crowd. "Justice was served not just for me, but for every person whose voice has been silenced by unchecked power. This verdict is a reminder that accountability still matters in our democracy." Her words cut through the ambient noise with the precision of a truth honed by experience. She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the sea of cameras and cell phones. There are too many Samantha Reeds out there, people who ask simple questions and find themselves branded as threats. We cannot accept that. We must stand together to demand transparency, to demand respect, and to demand an end to systemic abuses of authority. Reporters scribbled furiously as Samantha continued, her tone shifting from solemn reflection to a rallying cry. "If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of truth over prejudice, then speak out. Share this moment. Stand with those who have been wronged. And if you haven't yet subscribed to our channel, join us as we continue to shine a light on stories of resilience, on fights for justice, and on the strength of ordinary citizens standing up for their rights. The cameras captured every nuance, the determined set of her jaw, the unwavering strength in her eyes, the warmth that flickered in her smile as she offered a call to action. Below her, the steps trembled with the weight of history shifting beneath their feet. As the press scrum gradually dispersed, Marcus stepped up beside her, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. She looked at him, gratitude reflected in her expression. He returned her gaze with a nod. No words needed to convey the partnership that had carried them through every twist and turn of the trial. Behind them, the courthouse doors swung open and closed with the ebb and flow of onlookers. The marble facade, bathed in late afternoon light, stood witness to a victory that transcended one case. In the distance, the city's skyline shimmered, a reminder that the fight for justice extended far beyond these steps. Samantha turned, addressing a small group of community members who had gathered to show support. "This isn't the end," she said quietly, voice firm. "It's the beginning of a broader conversation about how we ensure accountability in every corner of our society. We'll need your voices, your votes, and your vigilance." One by one, well-wishers came forward, neighbors, activists, and even strangers who felt personally connected to her story. They offered handshakes, murmured thanks, and, in some cases, tears of relief. Samantha received each gesture with grace, acknowledging the communal nature of this victory. Later that evening, as the courthouse steps emptied and the floodlights bathed the stone facade, Samantha and Marcus walked to her car. The air was cool, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and laughter from a nearby cafe. Samantha slid behind the wheel, the polished leather seat welcoming her like an old friend. Marcus closed the passenger door and settled in, glancing over at her with a tired but triumphant grin. "You did it," he said softly. She exhaled, leaning back and closing her eyes for a moment. "We did it," she corrected, offering him a tired smile. "And now the real work begins." Marcus nodded, understanding the depth of her words. "Where do we go from here?" Samantha started the engine, the rumble echoing in the quiet street. "We keep telling these stories," she replied. "We keep holding power to account. And we keep reminding people that their voices matter." She tapped the dashboard where a small recorder still held her call to action. "Subscribe. Speak out. Stay vigilant. That's the next step." He glanced at the recorder, then back to her face. "I'll help you carry this forward." She returned his gaze with a look that blended relief, resolve, and the recognition of shared purpose. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "We're in this together." Under the soft glow of the street lamp, they drove off, two allies bound by the fight for justice, heading into the night with a story that had already begun to ripple through the city. The courthouse steps stood empty behind them, but their message lingered in the air, a thunderous verdict, a call to action, and the conviction that truth once unleashed has the power to transform not just one trial, but an entire system.